We're going to move on to rugby now because since joining the European Elite Club competition, South African teams have failed to assert themselves in this Champions Cup, unlike they do in the URC. In the last 3 seasons, no South African team has progressed past the quarterfinals in the Champions Cup. And to talk more about this, we have roped in respected journalist and rugby analyst Ashfaq Mohammed. He actually wrote about this in the paper as well as in IOL about why South African teams are not performing well in this new European competitions, and he joins us to talk more. There he is. Ashfaq, good evening and thanks for joining us on Sports Live on SABC News.
Good evening, Tabiso. Thanks for having me.
It's clearly an important subject that you're joining us when the Stormers are playing, right? We have to talk about this one.
Yes, of course. You know, it's a massive situation in South African rugby at the moment, and all our teams are grappling with this issue, you know, of whether they should prioritize the Champions Cup over the United Rugby Championship. And that's, you know, something, a conundrum that all our teams are battling with at the moment. And that is why we see none of our teams have made the playoffs for the Champions Cup this season.
I mean, it's dubbed, someone once dubbed it as the Champions League of rugby. Why then are South African teams not prioritizing it?
That's it's a difficult conundrum facing our teams, Tabiso, because, you know, if you look at the budgets of particularly the French clubs and the English clubs, they have massive amounts of money to spend. That is why they can sort of pick almost a test player in every position throughout their squad. You know, even a 23-man squad on a match day, almost every player there is an international, whereas, you know, the Bulls, Stormers and Sharks, okay, the Sharks do have a few, but they've had a lot of injuries this season. But maybe the Bulls and Stormers may have about 7 or 8 Springboks in their team. And when you compare to the overseas sides, not only do they have French test players and English test players, but also many from around the world. They have All Blacks, Wallabies, a lot of Samoans, Fijians, Tongans, and all those kind of international. And also a few Springboks, of course. We've got Andre Pollard at Leicester. We've got Erkel Snyman at Leinster, and so we can go on. So many of our top stars are also playing in Europe. So how do you compete with, you know, euros and pounds when we've got the rands here? So that is a difficulty facing our teams.
South African rugby is known for depth, and you will think that there are players that are good enough also to play whenever they are needed. Is there also a lack of depth then, or is it just balancing the squads and the players that they have at the moment?
Yeah, I think there is enough depth. That is why I wrote that comment piece in independent newspapers and on IRL, because I feel that just at the moment, our coaches are prioritizing the United Rugby Championship over the Champions Cup. And why I find that problematic is that I feel that the URC is like a normal league, you know, almost like the English Premier League in football, whereas, as you mentioned earlier, Champions League in football, and that is what the Champions Cup is for me, and how the European teams view the Champions Cup. That is why you find Toulouse pick almost an entire French team. Even Antoine Dupont himself made the trip all the way to Durban to play against the Sharks in the Champions Cup. That's how important it is to them. So why aren't we also ensuring that whoever the Springboks are in the Stormers, Sharks and Bulls teams are available, fit and ready and at their best for this Champions Cup games, where the pool games are across December and January, and if you qualify for the players, and then the players is later on in the season. So I just feel to get through that pool stage, it's a difficult juggling act, because you have the Springbok tours and the Springboks playing on the Southern Hemisphere calendar, and our franchises playing on the Northern Hemisphere calendar. So that is why you find someone like Kainan Moody was 9 weeks on tour in Europe, first for the Bulls, then with the Springboks, and then another 2 weeks at the Bulls, which is obviously a very difficult situation.
Okay, so scheduling also another issue. But you did say in that column that I know there have been issues of travel and just the toll that it takes. Are those not excuses that should be made?
Look, those are valid excuses. But again, if you prioritize, if you say that you've got 4 Champions Cup pool games across December and January, so that's only 4 weeks really, where you need your absolute best team, your first choice Springboks that you have in your franchises available for those 4 games. So that would mean ensuring that perhaps those kind of players miss the first part of the URC league season, so that because they've been on Springbok duty, so why play them in September or October whenever the Boks aren't playing? Why are they then also playing URC? They should actually just be totally cut out of that at that stage, so that they can be at the best for the Champions Cup. Then, once you play the Champions Cup games, and if you've qualified through the pool, having picked your best team, then you can again plan for the rest of the season with regards to the URC and Champions Cup and what should take priority. But I just feel at the moment we are not prioritizing the Champions Cup as the most important tournament in the season.
Is that why also it seems like the fans haven't bought into it because of how the teams are approaching this tournament?
I think this can still be a bit more education with regards to that from the organizers. I feel that South African rugby fans may not, as maybe perhaps our coaches, or certainly some of our coaches, may not fully comprehend the magnitude of the Champions Cup. I think Jake White does, because he's coaching in France as well, in Montpellier, and he knows how important it is. But again, even in last season, when the Bulls made the quarterfinals, because of the URC and wanting to ensure that he goes far there, he picked virtually a second-string team for the quarterfinal against Northampton. Now, Northampton in England, they're one of the top teams as well. So he thought, okay, even if he sends perhaps his top Bulls team, they probably won't beat Northampton in England. So, but I think we need to move on from that kind of mindset. If we pick our best possible teams, we should back our teams to even beat Toulouse in France, Northampton in England.
Just remind us now, where do the Bulls go now that they didn't make the quarterfinals?
Well, now they are in the Challenge Cup along with the Sharks. The Stormers didn't make it to the Challenge Cup. So the Challenge Cup is almost like the Europa League in soccer, where if you didn't qualify for the playoffs in the Champions League, you then move down into the round of 16 for the Challenge Cup. So the Bulls and the Sharks will have made it through to the round of 16 for the Challenge Cup, but they also continue with the URC season, as we saw today, the Bulls beating the Lions at Ellis Park. The Stormers didn't even make it now through to the Challenge Cup, so they've only got the URC to focus on for the rest of the season.
Okay, wonderful, Ashfaq. Always a pleasure talking to you and reading your stuff in the independent newspapers. So you've got a podcast going on also that I saw earlier in the week. So great. We'll catch up with you online. But I think it's an important point that you make, that the mindset needs to change here with the South African teams in these competitions. Thank you for joining us on Sports Live.
Cheers. Thanks, Abizo.
Thank you, Ashfaq Mohammed. They're one of the most respected sports journalists and rugby journalists in this country here, saying that we need to change the way we're approaching these tournaments, because this is the Champions League of rugby.